The years of disillusionment. During the second and third years of his marriage, Muhammad Ali Jinnah made three remarkable decisions. He resigned from the Imperial Legislative Council, the Home Rule League, and the Indian National Congress. For some time after this, he was overshadowed by other leaders, especially Gandhi. The graph of Jinnah's career showed a downward trend, but as his story unfolded, the three decisions were proved to be honorable, wise, and right. On 8 July 1918, the joint recommendations of the Secretary of State and the Viceroy were published. As the Montagu-Chelmsford report, Jinnah was cautiously favorable. In a statement to the press, he suggested vital changes, but he ended his criticisms by advising his countrymen to treat the report with due respect and serious consideration. He tried to influence other leaders towards his serious consideration, among them Dr. Annie Besant, who had said of the report that it was unworthy of England to offer and unworthy of India to accept. Mr. Kanji Davarkadas has recorded his version of the meeting between Jinnah and Dr. Besant, who came down to Bombay to see him. Jinnah wanted her to tone down her criticism of the proposals, and he had a 2-hour tete-a-tete conference with Dr. Besant. As he came out of her room almost half dead at about 8 in the evening, I asked, "Well, Jinnah, what happened?" With his hand on his head, he answered, "My dear fellow, never argue with a woman." The next move was during the September session of the Legislative Council, when a committee of non-official members approved the suggested Montagu-Chelmsford reforms. With certain qualifications, in November the war ended and a semblance of peace came to Europe, but not to Indian politics. Within a few weeks of the happy news of the armistice, the annual sessions of both Congress and the Muslim League met in Delhi. During 11 years since the split at Surat in 1907, there had been no steep differences of policy within Congress. But in December 1918, the extremists, since described as nationalists, dominated the debates and wholly condemned the proposed Montagu-Chelmsford reforms. Jinnah had to look close at his political chessboard. For many years, he had enjoyed the increasing support of the moderates in Congress. In his idealistic policy of Hindu-Muslim unity, they had applauded all his peaceful intentions, but they were now outnumbered by the nationalists, with their demand for immediate self-government. Jinnah was among the outnumbered. Gandhi, in prison or out, was to catch the eye and raise the fervor of the people, with his gift for emotional leadership, which Jinnah lacked. Any sympathy for British policy that had been awakened in India by the Montagu-Chelmsford report was killed by two alarming events early in 1919. In January, the draft of a bill that was later passed as the Rowlatt Act came before the Legislative Council. The bill, the outcome of recommendations of a committee presided over by Mr. Justice Rowlatt, sought to curb seditious crime by giving the government power to detain and try insurgents and active enemies of its policy, without a jury. Although these powers were safeguarded by elaborate protection against abuse, and although they were never enforced, thoughtful Indians became anxious as to the possible dangerous effects of such a new shackle on the freedom of the people. Jinnah shared this anxiety. He enumerated his objections on his fingers in the Legislative Council and said at the end, "It is my duty to tell you that, if these measures are passed, you will create in this country from one end to the other a discontent and agitation the like of which you have not witnessed. And it will have, believe me, a most disastrous effect upon the good relations that have existed between the government and the people." In the third week of March, the repugnant Rowlatt Act became law, and on 28 March, Jinnah wrote to the Viceroy, accusing the government of India of having ruthlessly trampled upon the principles for which Great Britain avowedly fought the war. He considered that the passing of the Act clearly demonstrated that the Imperial Legislative Council was a legislative but in name a machine propelled by a foreign executive. As a protest, he tendered his resignation and ended his letter with the hope that this black act would be annulled. Gandhi's protest was less personal. He commanded a day of humility and prayer, and remembering the success of his policy in South Africa, he ordered a similar campaign of non-violent civil disobedience in India. But Gandhi did not sense the peril in releasing a thoughtful policy among millions of untutored, superstitious people. Also, he further bewildered them by announcing the beginning of his campaign for 30 March and then changing it to 6 April. In many parts of India, the day of humility and prayer became one of riots and bloodlust. When Gandhi made a tour of the big cities, he succeeded only in awakening the passions he dreaded most. On 7 April, Gandhi was forbidden entry into the Punjab, and the police escorted him back to Bombay. On the 9th, in Amritsar, two Hindu leaders who had been making rebellious speeches were arrested for deportation. These two acts led to cruel rioting in the city. Three European bank managers were murdered, their safes were looted, and a crowd of insurgents tried to fire the railway station. On the 11th, the British commander of the Jalandhar Brigade, Brigadier General R.E.S. Dyer, was ordered to quell the disturbance. Public meetings were declared unlawful. But on 13 April, several thousand Indians gathered within the Jalianwala Bagh, a walled area from which there were only two narrow ways of escape. Then followed an act of terrible folly. General Dyer ordered his troops to fire on the defenseless throng. Almost 400 were killed and 1,200 wounded. Martial law was declared throughout the Punjab and enforced with humiliating ruthlessness. Then Gandhi realized the savage consequences of his civil disobedience movement and he called off the campaign. But sullen resentment remained. Long after calm was restored to the Punjab and the memory of Amritsar soured Indian politics for many years to come. Jinnah had no part in these terrible acts and decisions. He remained aloof, watching Gandhi use his dangerous talent for influencing the Hindus. He was their mahatma or great soul, and his power over them went deeper than politics, into subconscious instincts that were fused with their mysticism and their worship of many deities. But he also came to enjoy influence over the Muslims for a different reason. They were monotheist, and there were no religious implications in their regard for Gandhi's leadership. His appeal to them succeeded only when it was purely national and non sectarian, or when he chose to espouse a cause of particular concern to the Muslims. In this matter, events served him well. The scene widens to include Britain and her relationship with the vanquished Turks at the end of the 1914 to 1918 war. The punishment of Turkey was defined in the Treaty of Sevres on 10 August 1920. Contrarily to all assurances made by Mr. Lloyd George to loyal Indian Muslims during the war, the Sultan's empire was to be divided and shared, and his powers as caliph ignominiously reduced. The Muslims in India were indignant against Britain for this offense to their spiritual overlord, and they formed a caliphate movement to defend their religious rights. Gandhi acted quickly and assumed the role of their champion. In August, a few days after the signing of the Sevres Treaty, he wrote to the Viceroy and deplored the unscrupulous, immoral, and unjust treatment of the caliphate. He wrote also that he had neither respect nor affection for the government that had failed to punish the officials guilty of the wanton cruelty and inhumanity in the Punjab, and he announced his decision to begin a campaign of complete non-cooperation. Jinnah waited a month before he made his protest against the humbling of the caliphate. Jinnah was cautious. He had not joined the caliphate movement. a crusade that demanded the renunciation of titles, office, and appointments in government service, and the boycott of all British goods and enterprises. This was not his way. He sat back and observed Mahatma Gandhi, seducing into his fold a number of powerful Muslim religious leaders, some of whom even agreed to form societies for the protection of cows, as a reciprocal gesture to those Hindus who had agreed to be indignant over the British treatment of the Caliphate. In September, Jinnah at last stated his view at a meeting of the Muslim League in Calcutta. He denounced the post-war reforms of the British government. He again rebuked the self-satisfied viceroy who sat in Olympian Simla, and then referring to the Rowlatt Act, the Punjab atrocities and the spoliation of the Caliphate, he said, one degrading measure upon another, disappointment upon disappointment, and injury upon injury can lead to only one end. It led Russia to Bolshevism. It has led Ireland to Sinn Féinism. May it lead India to freedom. Despite his indignation, Jinnah remained reasonable. When he spoke of Gandhi's campaign of non-cooperation at the same Muslim League session in Calcutta, he was not dictatorial. He advised his listeners patiently as if they were students at a leaguer. It is now for you to consider whether or not you approve of its principle, and approving of its principle, whether or not you approve of its details. The operations of this scheme will strike at the individual in each one of you, and therefore it rests with you alone to measure your strength and to weigh the pros and cons of the question before you arrive at a decision. But once you have decided to march, let there be no retreat in any circumstances. The advice seemed ambiguous, but there was no ambiguity within himself, and Jinnah soon showed that he approved of neither the principle nor the details of Gandhi's plan. In October 1920, Jinnah resigned from the Home Rule League. Dr. Bisan, its creator, had already departed because, she said, the League had become so intertwined with religion. Gandhi had been elected in her place, and most cleverly, he had suggested that the title be changed to Swaraj Sabha, the Hindi equivalent of Home Rule League. He thus enlarged its appeal beyond the English-speaking few to the Hindi-speaking many. He also extended the aim of the League under Dr. Visan, with Jinnah as a member. The slogan had been self-government within the British Empire. Gandhi appealed for complete Swaraj, freedom from all ties with Britain. Jinnah's reaction to this change was typical. The lawyer in him, the absolute tidiness of his mind, urged him to speak again of constitutional methods and of responsible government. When he protested that the meeting was not competent to change the constitution of the League, the chairman answered that it was open to any member to resign his membership. If he could not abide by the altered constitution, it was then that Jinnah, with 19 other members, decided to leave. The episode demonstrated not only Jinnah's independence and stubborn devotion to constitutional methods, it firmly revealed his deep, instinctive dislike of the Mahatma's mind. Gandhi wrote and asked him to return to the Home Rule League to take his share in the new life that had opened up before the country. Jinnah refused in a letter that states clearly his thoughts at the time. He wrote, I thank you for your kind suggestion offering me to take my share in the new life that has opened up before the country. If, by new life, you mean your methods and your program, I am afraid I cannot accept them, for I am fully convinced that it must lead to disaster. Your methods have already caused split and division in almost every institution that you have approached hitherto. People generally are desperate all over the country, and your extreme program has for the moment struck the imagination mostly of the inexperienced youth and the ignorant and the illiterate. All this means complete disorganization and chaos. What the consequences of this may be, I shudder to contemplate. Jinnah's thoughts and words grew out of his proved experience. He believed that emancipation could only come through the education of the people, a conviction that had not wavered since he fought for Gokhale's elementary education bill 8 years before. And he believed that to stir the masses by way of their emotions was a sin. This was the wedge driven between himself and Gandhi. whom he described as that Hindu revivalist at this time and forever. In future years, Jinnah was to share many talks with Gandhi, but the cleavage remained and revealed itself in facetious exchanges of mockery and sharp answers. One day Gandhi said to Jinnah, "You have mesmerized the Muslims." Jinnah answered, "You have hypnotized the Hindus." Another day, when they appeared together before an attack of reporters and press photographers, Gandhi said to Jinnah, "You like this, don't you?" Jinnah answered, "Not as much as you do." In support of this amusing petulance between them, there is a story told by Mr. Muhammad Noman, the first secretary of the All India Muslim Students Federation. He said, "One day I went to see Jinnah early in the morning. He was sitting up in bed reading a speech that Gandhi had made. It was sometime in January or February 1940. Jinnah said to me, 'You know, I have not slept a wink, reading this and trying to find out exactly what is in his mind.'" Jinnah's disillusionment became complete during the session of Congress at Nagpur. In December 1920, 14,000 delegates met and agreed, under Gandhi's spell, to support the decision of the Home Rule League to abandon all compromise and demand absolute freedom for India. Almost to a man, Jinnah accepted. They agreed to employ Gandhi's weapons of non-cooperation and boycott to achieve this freedom. There is no verbatim report of Jinnah's protest against what he regarded as political anarchy. The focus was on the Mahatma, gazing into his crystal and even prophesizing an actual day, 30 September 1921, for India's deliverance. Among the delegates at Nagpur was Diwan Chaman Lal, the distinguished Indian barrister. He has said of Jinnah, whom he first knew in 1918, "He was a lovable, unsophisticated man, whatever may be said to the contrary, and he was unpurchasable." Diwan Chaman Lal has recalled the scene during the Congress meeting in Nagpur, when Jinnah protested against Gandhi's extreme measures. Jinnah said, "Your way is the wrong way. Mine is the right way. The constitutional way is the right way." At this, one of the leaders of the Caliphate movement, Maulana Muhammad Ali, leapt up and said, "You talk too much of the constitutional way. It reminds me of a story of a young Tory who came out of the Carlton Club one evening and walked up to Piccadilly Circus, where there was a Salvation Army meeting in progress. The speaker was saying, 'Come this way, it is God's way.' The young Tory interrupted him and said, 'How long have you been preaching this?' 20 years, said the Salvationist. 'Well,' was the answer, 'if it's only got you as far as Piccadilly Circus, I don't think much of it.' Diwan Chaman Lal then said. Jinnah sat down with a hurt look on his face. He just lapsed into silence. There is one paragraph in Sir Chimachal Sital's recollections and reflections that adds but little to this picture of Jinnah on the edge of the wilderness. Sir Chaman Lal wrote, "Jinnah strongly opposed this change and boldly stood his ground in spite of violent opposition from a large part of the audience. After this, Jinnah parted with Congress. Thus he abandoned all public office except for the membership of the Muslim League. And even there he met antagonism from the many members who were swerving towards Gandhi's opinions. Many years were to pass before any observer could decide whether Muhammad Ali Jinnah's stubbornness, his consistency, was the hobgoblin of a little mind or the mark of a great strategist who was content to bide his time.